We're here today to talk about real estate.
Hello and welcome back to the Real Estate Unlimited podcast. My name is Sierra Steinmetz.
Brian Schuby.
I'm Carrie Steele.
I'm Bill Jones.
And we're the Jones Home Team.
And this is episode 17. Today we're talking a little bit about earnest money and possession of a home after closing. So a lot of misconception about both. I guess before we get into it here, make sure you like, subscribe, do all those fun things. But who wants to take us away here? So, Brian, you want to talk earnest money first?
Sure.
All right, what you got?
So a lot of questions about earnest money, I guess, and what exactly it is, when to use it. So earnest money is really just a deposit that a buyer puts down to show that they're serious in purchasing a home. The amount of what you put down usually varies. I know we were just kind of looking, and the average is usually between 1% and 3% of the sales price. I would say around here. What do you guys see? Typically, like $500 to $1,000 typically is what we see.
Yeah, our price point, it's usually fairly, bigger price point purchase, sometimes more, but.
Yep.
Yeah.
And again, that can always, vary. I've done some 250s and some even higher ones then. So
I've done some lower ones, $100.
I don't know if that's really worth it.
No,
but
probably
okay.
not.
So earnest money just kind of, again, shows the seller that you're serious in purchasing their home. And as far as what happens with that earnest money, typically once you're working a deal, you get to closing, that earnest money is usually one of two things. It's usually either returned to the purchaser, or they use it as a credit towards the what they need to bring towards closing then. If the deal would happen to fall apart, let's say because of an inspection or because of a financing contingency or something like that, typically that earnest money is returned to the purchaser. If the buyer backs out, let's say we get to 2 days before closing and the buyer just has cold feet and says, "Oh my gosh, I can't purchase this home." Typically that's, I guess, ideally the seller would get to keep those funds then, just to kind of show.
Yeah, that's one of the big misconceptions. We'll talk more about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So like I said, it just depends on the transaction in itself and where that earnest money goes. And I know, Bill, like we always talk about, in order to release, I guess, if we're holding that earnest money as the real estate agent or the company, you need to have both a document signed by both buyer and seller stating exactly where that earnest money goes at the end of that transaction if it would fall apart then.
In cash deals, those are payable directly to the seller, correct?
They can be, it just
Made
depends. Yeah,
payable.
we've had some of them like that to where if you're talking a truly non-refundable kind of setup, that would be a recommendation with that. So, and every area is different. I guess our area works that way, but if you're in some other market, sometimes there's a lot of attorneys involved or they're handling the closing or the transaction, but
I was going to say, even for our area, typically, like I said, we bring it up. However, I would say I don't typically use it a whole heck of a lot. Just
talking
because,
earnest money?
Yeah. Just
Same.
because there's so many outs for
Right.
a purchaser in a contract. Your financing, your inspections. If a buyer, I guess, truly wanted to get out of a contract, I'm sure they could find a way
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say our Tiffin market, there's not a lot of agents that write in earnest money. It seems like, I don't know. It seems like
I would say the typical time that I happen to use it is if there's multiple offer situation and I want to try to make our offer look as appealing as I possibly can, then I'll throw it in there. But
Situational. You have people that they, come look at a low priced house and then they automatically want to throw like $2,500 earnest money.
Yep.
Have you guys seen that? Where they just get really aggressive and they just say, what if I were to put X amount of dollars down? Is that going to change? Like, it depends on the offer.
Yeah.
Depends on what else they have.
I've had a couple this year too that like the seller maybe they hadn't bought or sold a home in a considerable amount of time when earnest money was like every single offer you had it, and so then they'd come back and be like, well, why isn't your buyer putting earnest money
I remember you telling me about that.
And I would say, well, because we're the only offer, because that's what you told me, so I didn't really know that we needed that, but we can add some if that's going to make them happy. So
Yeah,
and it's just like, they were like, hey, we want $250, and it's just like at the end of the day, like $250, is that really gonna
what's that gonna do?
Yeah, make or break your
and
seller?
Because it's not like it's going in their pocket right then either.
Yep.
Like you have to see it through or whatever. And again, if it falls apart and it's going back to the seller, that $250, I mean,
For the listeners, can you bring in a sack of nickels and pay for your?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
what can you use?
Yeah.
And we prefer not cash. No, I would rather that be a good bank check or something. A good check, obviously, and that's where we get into the. I guess I'll come back to this as far as getting your money back, but sort of the different areas like our Findlay market, it seems like a lot of those agents and sellers expect some earnest money to get those questions a lot more often. Like you're talking, Sierra, where it's like, where's your, like they're appalled. Like, how does this offer not have earnest money?
Yeah.
What does that mean? And at the end of the day, I think it goes to the contingencies. All of our contracts have so many contingencies built in that there's just no teeth in it. I think you go back to like what you're talking, Carrie, like if there's a non-refundable kind of earnest money, it doesn't have to be that much, but maybe there's some more skin in the game at that point. But right now, someone could write that big $20,000 earnest money deposit, and it's subject to the contract.
Because I know we had talked about that, Bill. I had that referral for North Carolina this year, and just talking with the agents from down there, and they have I don't remember what exactly it was, a deposit, but I don't remember, there was a specific name for it, but it was what it was, again, varied off the purchase price or what the price of the property was. It would be a pretty much a non-refundable deposit then, in regardless of whether that buyer purchased that home or not, that money went to the seller.
Yeah, they're losing that then at that point then. So that to me that's a serious skin in the game. I've got money on the table or money involved with that. The seller knows they're going to get, whether it's $250 or $20,000, they know they're getting something. But and again, we could talk about the contracts all day. There's so many contingencies, financing, inspection, appraisal, all that stuff could come up. And then you get into there's a problem. Where does that earnest money go then? So more often than not, it goes back to the buyer. I've only had a buyer a handful of times ever lose earnest money. Have you guys? I think
I've had it once.
I don't think I've had them lose it ever.
Yeah.
I had a situation where it could have come close, and that's where the sellers lost market value because of what the buyers, dragging their feet on all the different things, and ultimately ended up not buying the house. House goes on the market for a lower price, and that's where I feel like if there was a non-refundable deposit, then it would go straight to the sellers because they've lost out on 3, 6, 7 months, however long it took.
A ton of marketing time.
I was going to say, I just had one this year. Now that I think about it, I was representing the sellers, and the buyers wanted out of the contract, and that was part of it. At the end, we were just like, hey, look, if you guys want out of it, that's fine, but we're keeping the earnest money, and the buyers just gave it up.
So then what we need from there, at least in our contracts, or Ohio is what we need. I don't know about every state, but we need, I think, Brian, you talked about this, everybody to sign off on it. Buyer and seller agree to it then. If that doesn't happen, then we sit on the money for 2 years. So if a broker is holding that money, it sits in our earnest trust account for 2 years and then goes back to the buyer. So even if the seller won't sign off on it, the seller or the buyer is going to get it back 2 years later. Or we need a court order saying buyer or seller went to court, they agreed to whatever the judge signed off on it. We get that order, we can do something with it. So that's a big misconception. A lot of times I think agents need to make sure they talk to their clients that this money isn't a deposit you're getting no matter what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. This money is held in escrow. It's just an earnest deposit. It's not a non-refundable deposit. And then that money may go to you if it's like you're talking, Brian, something's negotiated out. And to your point, Carrie, like there's some of those deals that just sit there for months and then the buyer backs out for really no reason. And it's still,
as a seller, I'd be so upset.
Yeah.
And I guess another thing to add to that is, I know as far as when you write a contract and you include earnest money in there, there's typically a time frame of when that earnest money needs to be deposited into that trust account then. So again, I think around here, I'd say most people put 3 days. So that earnest money needs to be collected and deposited within 3 days of, acceptance of that offer. But I guess ultimately it depends on whatever's agreed upon in the purchase contract.
So I guess the moral of the story is, if you're expecting earnest money to go to you, even if you write it into the contract, I've had a misconception there too. Let's write it into the contract that, this money's going to do whatever. Doesn't really matter. Once the whole deal falls apart, I need another piece of paper that says, buyer and seller agree to A, B, and C, and this is how we're going to move forward with the money. And then getting the money back too, just to avoid fraud. We've had situations too where a buyer writes a deposit or an earnest money and immediately tries to back out of the contract for something and says, I need that money back for whatever. And they want us, the broker, then to write a check to them immediately. And we don't even know if that check has cleared. So that was there's only a couple instances here, but I know nationwide there's a lot of fraud with that. They write a $10,000 earnest money check. 2 days later, the broker writes them a check back, and then their check was
bounces.
bad. Yeah, so you're not getting it back until we know that check is cleared. So that's a fun one. I don't know. That's I guess, what's your overall thought on earnest money? I'm not a big fan just because it seems to have no teeth.
Yeah, I'd rather not deal with it if we don't have to.
Yep.
That's how I feel.
In our market, anyway.
Yeah. Some of the old school sellers, they still want to see that there's still something there, but okay, we'll try to get it. But really just have that conversation. You're probably not going to get this unless everybody agrees. Mm-hmm. So, all right, well, we could talk for 2 hours on earnest money then. It's not that sexy of a topic, but, it's something that needs talked about then. And then post-closing here, we're going to have all kind of hot takes on this maybe. So our market, just to tee this up, generally, if someone's living in a house and, if Sam and Sally seller living in a house and Bob and Betty buyer trying to buy the house and they're still there, generally Bob and Betty are going to give the sellers 2 weeks, 30 days after closing to get out of the house then, get moved, get situated, do whatever. This blew my mind to go to some other markets and they're like, what are you talking about? It's keys at closing always, there's no post-possession. There's no anything like that. So that was, I can't remember what conference we went to. It was out of state somewhere. They were talking about that and or maybe it was in Denver that, it's always keys at closing, which just doesn't make sense to me, I guess, in our market, but
or even rent back of some nature or something like that. It's not always just immediate, keys at closing. But yeah, around here, I think what you're saying is we typically give that new buyer, the seller, extra time after closing, and it's typically there's no rent or anything like that.
Sure.
Right, because we were dealing with one sale where they were trying to move in before closing, and there's just so many. It's so wide open on so many things that could go wrong, or it might go wrong leading up to the sale. When you go out and purchase a new car, you take it for a test drive, but you typically don't get to take it home for 30 days and then decide, maybe I didn't want the Honda Civic, maybe I want the the Suburban.
Yep.
So
that'd be amazing. You could always have a new car.
Yeah, right. Yeah, every 30 days. So yeah, talking about when we get keys, and I think it's different for every area, but like Bill said, in Ohio, and especially if somebody's occupying the house, it's important to look for, do you get keys at possession, immediate possession, keys at closing, or is there a delayed period? And that could deter some buyers, because if there's an up in the air, like a to be determined possession date, which happens in Ohio, where it's negotiable on possession date, it could be something as simple as they need to wait till their storage unit's up in 14 days, or it could be something like, we haven't found a house yet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. And make sure, I guess, when you're writing these deals, everybody doesn't think about all that. I guess that's where a good agent comes into place and trying to think of all the stuff that's going to come up. So when you're negotiating a deal, everybody's just worried about the price or whatever, and they just kind of assume, they make assumptions about what should happen or what they think is going to happen. But you got to lay that stuff out now. I've had people, you talk about it when you're negotiating the deal, or, the contract, the purchase price and things like that. Okay, what about possession? That's just not even on their radar.
The radar.
But they're like, oh, we're good. We'll give them keys at closing. It's fine. We'll move on. And then you're a week out from closing. It's like, you guys haven't even started packing yet. Well, I thought we had 30 days. No, when we were sitting at your table, remember we talked about
30 days from that day.
Yeah.
From that day that you signed.
Yeah, no, we talked about it right there in the contract. It says, you're giving up possession at closing. So here the buyers thinking they're moving in that day. So now you're a couple days out from closing and trying to renegotiate the whole deal then. So that, and I know that we've all been there before, and there's a million things that cover in a purchase contract, but I don't know what's your guys' best way to, I guess, try to cut through that noise with somebody, to try to make sure they understand.
I think just being clear up front of what's going on, whether you have the buyer or the seller, just so that, it should be one of your tick marks when you present an offer on your whole net sheet or whatever you use. It should say when possession's going to be, like when they need to be out, whatever it is, like just as you would with the loan type or the purchase price or anything like that. You should be laying that out.
I reiterate it in writing, whether it's text or email. Is this going to work for you guys? Because realistically, they could say, oh, it's great for us to move on a Friday. And then it turns out, oh my gosh, that's the Friday that little Billy's going to be back home, and that's just not going to work for us. But we can't change it. That is in the contract. That is, you guys agreed to it. This is what we're doing. So little Billy's going to have to help move.
Yeah. And then the time of year makes a big difference too. I know sometimes people want to be in before Thanksgiving and Christmas and things like that. So yeah, kind of timing that out. I guess a lot of our agents in this area for a long time, I guess it was just kind of understood post-closing, if somebody's staying there, they're going to keep the utilities in their name. They're going to take care and maintenance the house. But then we had a few of those instances to where, who's paying for what then, especially if they're there for a couple of months afterwards. That's not insignificant. If there's an HOA involved, who's paying for that? Who's paying for the utilities? Who's paying for, insurance on different things if need be? So That's something to consider. So we've incorporated a post-closing document then that kind of spells all that, almost like a lease kind of situation. And I guess what's your guys' thoughts on, I guess, a seller or a buyer? How long should they give possession before they start talking money or consideration or a lease?
I mean, I think 30 days. I think 30 days, you shouldn't have to deal with any kind of extra, money or anything like that. But if it goes, it's, I guess, based on the contract. So if you're at 14 days and on day 15, it spells out that you start paying rent on day 15, then it goes by the contract. That's why we have these contracts in place, because we're all human and life happens. And, maybe your job gets postponed a week later and now you're not starting until a week later. That's not the buyer or the seller, whichever side it is. It's not their fault.
Right.
Now they're out housing for a week because your plans changed. That's why there's a contract. And ultimately, that protects both the buyer and the seller.
Yep, and taking care of maintaining the property then too, just because I've sold it. And that's a big mind shift then too. Like, this has been my home for 10 years, 20 years, whatever, a couple of years. That day, it's no longer technically your home. It's somebody else's home. So even if you're there an extra day, a month, 6 months, that's you're a tenant now. I mean, for I guess a definitive word, you're a holdover tenant in that property. So you got to take care of it. You got to maintain it. And if you want to start making changes, it's not your home to decide that anymore. And the amount, I know we get in arguments about this with people, like how much per day. So situation changes. We agreed on 2 weeks. How much per day is that going to cost that, seller?
And I think that kind of varies based off of the purchase price of the home too.
Yep.
If it's a $500,000 house, obviously if there's a mortgage on it, that payments, you want to try to at least kind of offset some of that payment amount.
Right.
Whereas if it's a $100,000 house, it won't be as high. So I think it just varies on what the purchase price is of that property.
And then the people that are being without housing, what would it cost for them to go to a hotel and pay for a storage unit and all that for their stuff to be placed for that short period, whether it's 1 day or 5 days, if that's even available?
I think that's a great point then too. So it's not only just, okay, we got to pack up the kids and a dog and go get a hotel for
Right.
150. So if you've got to be out and you don't have a place to move, you're talking moving company or you moving it, getting it somewhere
Quickly.
Yeah, like right now.
And pods, like those pod things, like do you have to order things? Is there even a storage unit available around here that
Probably
hard to come
not.
by? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not an insignificant. So there's a lot of stuff you really need to plan at the negotiation table, how that's going to work. But again, build in some flexibility because life does happen, and that amount. I guess I see that too. I've put $200 a day, $100 a day. Some markets that's probably nothing, but oh my God, that's ridiculous, $150 a day. Well, their new mortgage is costing them $175 a day, and that's not taxes, insurance, that's not anything else with that. So, and that's not talking about moving. Now that buyer needs to put their stuff in storage, or they're out and they got to pay something extra. So,
I mean, just to even go stay at a hotel for a night, it's $160, $170 a day.
So a lot to consider with that then, and taking care of it, who's paying for utilities, everything with that. But any other thoughts on either? Earnest money, moving?
I think one thing in our future podcast that we can talk about is when money goes into escrow, because you said that word at one point, and especially that 2-year waiting period on a check. What happens during that time, and who has access to the money? When can it be withdrawn? What for, etc.
Sure.
I think that'd be a good talking point for future.
The easy answer is just we've only had to do that a couple times where it sat there for 2 years. So if 2 years goes by, and we had one, we're still trying to track the person down where they'd never cashed the check.
Yeah.
So it's like,
that's the other thing.
Like, you don't need $500. I don't know, but
long,
that goes to the state then eventually.
How long does your check, depending upon your bank, how long does your escrow check stay good for? If it's a cashier's check, 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months, a year, how long? And if you get tied up in any kind of negotiations or repairs, do you need a new earnest money check?
Right.
And so there's a lot more to it than that.
Sure. So, big difference between deposit and earnest money. Your down payment, a lot of people get confused with that then too, like what their down payment is. So when you're buying a house, you have your closing costs with the bank, the title company, your down payment, you're going to need probably earnest money that can be used for some of that, but they're all different things. So, and then I guess I'm trying to think too on the post possession. Again, blows my mind that there's markets where it's everybody's keys at closing.
Yeah.
That just
Must
absolutely,
be cherry.
I don't know. Because Carrie, you and I just had that deal. It was just deal, a domino. We've talked about this 4 or 5 times now. Just deal after deal, home after home after home after home after home.
Yep.
How in the world do 5 or 6 families give up keys at closing.
On the same day.
On the same day. I don't know. I would love to hear from someone in another market where that's commonplace, because I don't know how that works.
Maybe they have a 364 square foot apartment or flat.
Yeah, and they can all just move the same
You can just-
day.
yeah.
I mean, have you guys ever thought about that? You probably have, because it's
you'd
never been
almost
a
have
thing.
to have everything packed up, sitting by the door, and then throw it on a truck
moving
quick.
company,
And
yeah.
Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe they do like something like that. They're like, okay, guys, we do have to have. You got to have 3 days. It's not going to be ridiculous. Maybe there's some.
Yeah.
Where 30 days seems like not enough a lot of times. Even that it was 30 days, and we had to plan out 27 days for this one, 30 days for that one. This one only gets 33 days. This one, or whatever the case may be. So, yeah, I don't know how you do that.
And
on
that
the
was
same
tight
day.
too.
Yeah, that was
extremely
ridiculous.
tight. Yeah.
To all same day. I'm going to think on that. How in the world could you do that? But it makes no sense. I forgot trivia too. Sorry. So I got no questions for you other than let's figure out how you do possession on 6 homes in one day.
Wow.
So, all right. Anything else, folks? Start of the year, 2025, big goals. What do you think the market's going to be like? I know we talked last week about, everything going up. Probably still, all the headlines are still inventory's way up, pricing is crashing, but it's percentages on what it was. It's still, I think, going to be very limited inventory, very limited. Brian, you and I were just talking, rates still seem to be going up, not down.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know
Commercial, more, I think commercial will come for sale.
Yeah, possibly.
More investors are looking at their portfolio, so it might be a good time for new investors to jump in and
pick some of that stuff up.
Yeah. Start their own portfolio.
I forgot my crystal ball, so I don't know what 2025 is going to be like. But yeah, I'm sure. I mean, we've done all right. 2024 is good for us.
I'm going to bring that prop next time.
Yeah, the crystal ball. So I know a lot of agents were really struggling 2024. We all could do more business. I mean, we all want as much as we can, but I feel like we had an okay year. I think 2025 is probably going to be much the same. So yeah, I guess if you're looking to buy or sell, let us know. This market, any other market, except those markets where you have to give up possession immediately. Like, we'll have to think on that one. That one we have to work on. So. All right, let's wrap it up there. That's episode 17. Stop back next week, episode 18. We'll talk more then.